Morning, my son-in-law told me I wasn't welcome at my own daughter's birthday dinner. I was standing in my driveway in a pair of old jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a bag of groceries I'd driven 40 minutes to bring her. I remember the exact moment. It was late October, the kind of cold that doesn't bite yet but reminds you it's coming. I could see my breath in the air. I had a pound of fresh shrimp, a bottle of the Chardonnay my daughter Molly used to ask me to bring every time she came home from college, and a card I'd spent 20 minutes picking out of the Walgreens on Route 9, because I wanted to get one that actually said something, not just happy birthday in cursive on a beige background. I knocked on the door. My son-in-law, Ted, answered it. He looked at the bag in my hand. He looked at me. And then, he said, almost casually, like he was telling me the recycling went out on Thursdays, "We're doing a private dinner tonight. Just close friends. I don't think this is a good time." I stood there for a second. "I'm her father," I said. He smiled, not a warm smile. The kind of smile that means the person has already decided something and is just waiting for you to figure it out. "I know," he said, "but Molly's had a long week and she needs to be around people who lift her up, not people who bring stress." I was 62 years old. I had driven 40 minutes in the cold with shrimp and Chardonnay. And my son-in-law had just told me I was stressful. I handed him the bag. I told him to tell Molly happy birthday. And I walked back to my truck. I didn't say anything else. I didn't raise my voice. I just drove home. That was the part Ted never understood about me. He always expected me to argue. And I never did. My name is Howard. I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, second to 4 kids. Father worked the docks. Mother cleaned houses on the north end of town. We weren't poor the way some people mean it. We always had food. We always had heat. But there was never extra, never anything left over at the end of the month. I understood money the way kids understand it when they watch their parents count it. I joined the Navy at 18, not because I wanted adventure, though I told myself that, because I wanted to learn something real. I ended up in logistics, supply chain, inventory, procurement, boring work that most people skip past when they talk about military service. But I learned how things move, how materials go from a factory in Ohio to a ship in the Persian Gulf, how waste happens and how to stop it, how one bad contract can cost an organization millions before anyone notices. When I got out at 26, I used the GI Bill to finish a degree in supply chain management at UConn. Then I went to work for a mid-sized manufacturing company in Hartford, started as a junior procurement analyst, spent the next 30 years working my way up. By the time I was 55, I owned the company. Not all of it. I had 2 partners, both of whom I'd known since the early years. But a controlling stake. Enough to matter. Remanufactured precision components, the kind of parts that go inside medical equipment, aerospace systems, industrial machinery. Nothing glamorous. No consumer products, no brand name. We didn't advertise. Most people who knew me had no idea what I did for a living. I drove a 2018 Ford F-150. I wore flannel shirts. I lived in the same house in Glastonbury I'd bought in 1998. My wife Carol passed away 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late. She was 57. We'd been married 31 years, and I still sometimes reach for my phone to call her when something happens that I know would make her laugh. Molly is our only child. She was 29 when the birthday dinner happened. She'd moved to Westport 2 years before with Ted, who worked in financial sales, not investment banking, not wealth management, just sales. Selling financial products to middle-income clients, he made decent money. He spent more than he made. Ted and I had never gotten along. I don't say that easily. I spent the first 2 years of their relationship trying. I bought him a beer when Molly first brought him home. I asked about his work. I listened to him talk for 45 minutes about a sales trip to Atlanta, and I nodded the whole time. I tried, but Ted had a way of dismissing me that was almost artistic. He never argued with me directly. He just redirected. He'd change the subject, talk over me, turn to Molly with something unrelated right in the middle of a sentence I was finishing. He made me feel like a piece of furniture, present, but not quite relevant. The thing he said most often, in different forms, was some version of, "Your dad worked really hard all his life, didn't he?" Said with a slight emphasis on worked, like the past tense was the point, like the sentence meant, he worked. And here he is. This is what that got him. He thought I was a retired warehouse manager. I had never corrected him. Molly knew what I did. She'd known for years. When she was in her 20s and I was going through the negotiations to become a majority partner, she'd asked me point blank one night over dinner, "Dad, what do you actually do?" Are you, okay financially? And I told her. I'd explained the business, the ownership stake, what it was worth. She'd gone quiet for a moment and then said, "Why don't you ever talk about it?" Because, I told her, I didn't build it to talk about it. She understood that about me. Ted didn't. Ted had never bothered to ask. 2 weeks after the birthday dinner, I got a call from my attorney. A company we'd been in negotiations with for 8 months, a larger firm out of Charlotte, had finally moved forward on an acquisition offer. They wanted to buy us out. It wasn't the biggest deal I'd ever been part of, but it was significant. The kind of significant that changes what your retirement looks like. I told my attorney to move forward. I told my 2 partners. I didn't tell Molly because I wasn't sure it was relevant to her, and because, honestly, since the birthday dinner, I'd been quieter around her. She'd called 2 days later to apologize. A soft apology. The kind that doesn't quite name the thing it's apologizing for. She said Ted had been stressed. I said I understood. I didn't push. What I didn't know was that Ted had been paying attention. He'd seen something on LinkedIn. I'd never been active on there, but when the acquisition started to finalize, some industry press had picked it up. A trade publication ran a brief piece. Precision components manufacturer finalizes sale to Charlotte-based firm. Founder and majority partner Howard Bellamy, 62, exits after 30 years. Ted had Googled me. I found out later from Molly that he'd spent an evening going through everything he could find. The acquisition price wasn't public, but the trade coverage was enough to understand the scale of the company. He'd found my name in old Chamber of Commerce records, a ribbon cutting from 2009, a regional business journal piece from 2015 that mentioned our contract wins with 2 aerospace clients. She said he'd been very quiet after that. The call came on a Sunday morning. It was Ted. He'd never called me directly before. It was always Molly who called, Molly who organized, Molly who sent me a text about holidays. Ted didn't call me. "Howard," he said. He said it in a new register. Warmer, a little uncertain. "I've been thinking about you. Wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the Sunday paper. I still get the physical paper. I said I was fine. "Good, good," he said. "Hey, listen, we've been talking about doing a trip down to the Outer Banks for the holidays this year. Molly really wants you there. We'd love to have you. Rent a big place, the whole deal." I didn't say anything for a moment. "She really misses you," he said. I know things have been a little, I don't know, complicated, but you're family, and I want to do better with that." I thought about the driveway in October, the bag of shrimp, the card I'd picked out at Walgreens. "I appreciate that," I said. "Let me think about it." He sounded surprised that I didn't say yes immediately. There was a pause. "Of course," he said. "Of course, no rush." What happened next wasn't something I planned. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a strategic person in that way. I don't set traps. I've never had the patience for it. And honestly, I think it says something unflattering about a person when they spend a lot of energy choreographing someone else's embarrassment. But I did go to the Outer Banks. Molly was so happy when I showed up. She hugged me in the driveway of the rental house and held on longer than usual, and I could feel that she meant it. We'd been in a strange place with each other since October. Not fighting, but not quite right either, and that hug was the first thing that felt real in a while. The house was a big one, 5 bedrooms, right on the water, wraparound deck. Ted's friends were there, a couple named Brent and Ashley, another guy named Joel who worked with Ted, and Joel's girlfriend. Nice enough people. They talked about Peloton memberships and kitchen renovations and Airbnb in Tuluma. Normal conversation. Ted was different with me that weekend, attentive in a way that was new. He kept including me, asking my opinion, laughing at things I said. He introduced me to Brent as Molly's dad, Howard, and then added, without me prompting it, "He's in manufacturing. He's had a really impressive career." Brent nodded with genuine interest. I shook his hand and changed the subject. That first evening, we were sitting on the deck, watching the sun go down over the sound, drinks in hand. And Ted said, to the group, but clearly aimed at me, "Howard, I have to say, I didn't know much about what you did when you were working. I think I had the wrong impression. I hope you know I have a lot of respect for what you built." Everyone looked at me. Brent and Ashley didn't know what was being referenced, but they could feel there was something underneath it. I looked at Ted. He was waiting. I think he expected me to say something gracious, to meet him there, to let us both step back from October together. I took a sip of my drink. "Thank you, Ted," I said. And then I waited. He waited too. And when I didn't add anything, when I just looked back out at the water, something shifted in him. He tried again. I mean it. Building a company like that from scratch, that's not easy. I have a lot of respect for it. I nodded. It was a good run, I said, and that was all I gave him. Later that night, after Molly's friends had gone to bed and she and I were alone in the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. He's trying, she said. She didn't say who. She didn't have to. I know, I said. He feels bad about October. He should, I said, gently, but without apology. She was quiet for a second. Then, I should have said something that night. I know that. I should have called him off at the door. She looked at me. I'm sorry I didn't. This was the apology that named the thing. I've been waiting for it without realizing it. You don't have to protect me, I told her. I've been fine, but you do have to decide what you're willing to accept in your own house, not for my sake, for yours. She nodded slowly. She understood what I was saying. She'd been making herself small around Ted for a while, accommodating his moods, apologizing for his behavior, managing the distance between him and me like it was her job. It wasn't her job. He's not a bad person, she said. She stalked. He measures people, I said, by what they look like, their worth. He doesn't mean to, but he does. She didn't argue with that. We drove back to Connecticut on a Monday. Molly gave me a long hug before I got in my truck. Ted shook my hand, a two-handed shake, the kind people do when they're trying to say something with a handshake that they can't quite say with words. On the drive home, I stopped at a diner outside New Haven. I ordered eggs and coffee and sat in a window booth and watched the highway for a while. A man across the room had his grandson with him. Kid couldn't have been more than 7, eating a waffle with serious concentration. The grandfather was watching him the way grandfathers watch grandchildren, just fully present, not thinking about anything else. I thought about my father. He'd worked the docks for 32 years. He smelled like salt water and diesel when he came home. He never owned anything. He died at 71 with a pension, a paid-off house in Bridgeport, and 4 kids who all showed up at his funeral and cried. I used to think his life was smaller than what I wanted for myself. Now I think I had that exactly backwards. He knew what mattered. I spent 30 years learning what he already knew. I paid for my eggs and left a $20 for a $12 check and got back in my truck. The acquisition closed in December. My attorney called to confirm. I was standing in my garage, reorganizing some shelves, when my phone rang. Afterward, I stood there for a minute with a box of old fasteners in my hands, thinking about all of it. 30 years. All the early mornings and the contract negotiations and the personnel problems and the quarter-end crunches. It was over, and I was standing in my garage holding a box of fasteners. I laughed a little. Carol would have found that funny. I called Molly that evening. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Dad. She sounded glad to hear from me. We'd been talking more since the Outer Banks. Something had settled between us. I wanted to tell you something, I said. I told her about the acquisition, the final numbers, what it meant. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Dad, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me when it started? I didn't want it to change anything, I said. I wanted to make sure it was real first. Another silence. Does Ted know? He found out in October, I said. That's why he called about the Outer Banks trip. I didn't say it with bitterness, just as a fact. She deserved to have the facts. Longer silence this time. I could hear her breathing. Okay, she said finally. Her voice was careful. Okay, she said finally. Her voice was careful. I need to think about some things. Take your time, I said. I'm glad you called, Dad. I'm glad you answered, I said. Happy almost holidays, sweetheart. It's March now. The tree in the backyard Carol planted the year we moved in has started budding again. I make coffee every morning. Same time, same mug Carol bought me at a gift shop in Bar Harbor on our 22nd anniversary. It says something forgettable on the side, but she thought it was funny, and now it's just my coffee mug. Things with Molly are better, not repaired entirely. There's still work to do, and I think she's been doing some of that work in conversations I'm not part of. She called me 3 Sundays in a row just to talk, which is more than we'd managed in 2 years. We're having Easter together. She asked me if I'd be willing to give Ted another chance, a real one, if he was willing to earn it. I told her I had never stopped giving him chances. I just stopped pretending the chances had been taken when they hadn't. Ted has not called me again. That's his choice. I'm not waiting. I'm not angry. I want to be clear about that too, because I think people expect a story like this to end in anger, in some triumphant moment where the other person finally understands what they did and suffers appropriately for it. But I don't feel triumphant. I feel like a 62-year-old man who drove 40 minutes with shrimp and Chardonnay and got turned away at his daughter's door, and who has had to sit with that and figure out what it means. What it means, I think, is this. You don't get to decide how people see you. You never did. Ted looked at me in my flannel shirt and decided I was someone to be managed, a mild inconvenience in his wife's life, a man whose best days were behind him. That was his decision to make. It always was. What I get to decide is what I do with the time I have left, who I spend it with, what I build. Not companies, I'm done with that, but what I actually build. Relationships. Mornings with coffee in the physical newspaper. Easter with my daughter. I'm not a man who holds grudges. I'm a man who remembers. There's a difference. Grudges are about wanting something from the person who hurt you. Memory is just knowing what happened, so you don't forget what's true. I know what's true, and I've got a pot of coffee on, and the morning is quiet. And honestly, for a Tuesday in March, that's about as good as it gets. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to earn something. Not money. Money is just the number that changes. I mean the other stuff, the kind of thing you can't put in an acquisition agreement or wire to an attorney's escrow account. What Ted did that October evening, standing in that doorway, telling me I brought stress, that I wasn't the kind of person Molly needed around her, that didn't come from nowhere. It came from a lifetime of measuring people the way you'd measure a room before buying furniture. Is there enough space for this? Does it fit the look I'm going for? He looked at me and saw a flannel shirt and an old truck and decided the math didn't work. That was a choice. And choices like that don't stay contained. They spread. They shape the air inside a marriage, inside a family, inside a man's relationship with his own reflection. I don't think Ted is a villain. I've resisted that framing from the beginning. Villains are easy. You can dismiss them, write them off, feel clean about walking away. Ted is something harder to deal with. A man who genuinely believes that worth is visible. That if a person mattered, you'd be able to see it. That quiet people in ordinary clothes who drive old trucks are quiet people in ordinary clothes who drive old trucks. And that's the whole story. The thing is, I used to half believe that too. When I was young, I wanted the markers. I wanted people to be able to look at me and understand what I'd done without me having to explain it. It took me a long time, and losing Carol, honestly, which rearranged everything, to understand that the need to be seen is different from the right to be respected. One you can let go of, the other doesn't require anyone's permission. What I tried to give Molly that night in the kitchen at the Outer Banks wasn't a verdict on Ted. It was something simpler, the idea that she gets to decide what she accepts. Not for me. For herself. Because the pattern I watched in her, the accommodating, the apologizing on his behalf, the managing of distances she didn't create, that pattern has a cost. It extracts something from you over time. I watched it happen. I didn't say anything for too long because I was trying not to be the difficult father-in-law. But staying quiet about something true isn't the same as being peaceful. It's just delayed. Integrity is an unglamorous thing. It doesn't announce itself. It's just what's left when the circumstances aren't flattering. When nobody's watching, when the outcome isn't clear, when holding the line means standing in a cold driveway and walking back to your truck without raising your voice. I've made that choice more times than I can count, in business and in life, and I can tell you that it compounds. Not financially, just inside. You become more yourself. You get quieter and more certain at the same time. Ted will either grow into something better or he won't. That's his work to do, not mine. What I can do is stay present for Molly, be honest when honesty is called for, and not pretend the October evening didn't happen just because December went smoother. My father never owned anything but that house in Bridgeport. He also never once let anyone make him feel small. I used to think those two facts were unrelated. I don't anymore.